Hello, I'm Tom Vohasek, and welcome to the A-List. Tonight, my guest is Michael Phillips. He's a film critic for the Chicago Tribune, and he's the host of At the Movies. Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to meet you. What actually got you started in the writing industry and the film critic industry, I guess?
Yeah, you know, it goes way back to probably childhood. I was really into movies as a kid, and I guess I always liked things like writing and English much more than things like math and science. That was my brother's stuff, math and science. And by the time I got to high school, lucky there, I was just in Racine, Wisconsin, and we had a pretty good school paper, and so it was a good place to start really kind of writing about what your passions were, what your interests were. And so, you know, I was able to write about film. And this was also a very good time. This was the mid-'70s, so it was just a kind of a great time for American film in particular. So, you know, I saw everything from, you know, Scorsese's Taxi Driver to Spielberg's Jaws, all kinds. It was, you know, so it was a wonderful time to kind of start out and just hack around and then realize, okay, you know, this is something I'd actually like to pursue seriously.
Oh, so you started on the school paper. Where did it go from there?
So from there, I went to the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities campus, and again, good stroke of luck in that I had a vague idea I wanted to stick with journalism. I was also doing some theater classes at that time. Oh. I was not a good actor, but I was a mediocre enough actor just to help me a little bit on television later, 25 years later. But on the writing end, the school paper, again, the university paper, the Minnesota Daily, was a well-funded state school newspaper. And so you could, this is in the late 70s now, and you could, you know, the folks who edited and wrote for that paper really could almost make a living by the time they were 19, 20, 21 years old working on the paper. So a lot of us were actually pretty poor students, but very dedicated newspaper people. And there wasn't, at that time, there wasn't anything like a minimum credit requirement for working on the paper. So you had a lot of, a very interesting mixture of people about my age, between say 19 and 23, just kind of coming up and getting serious about what they wanted to write about, sharing that staff with a lot of unreconstructed ex-hippies who never wanted to leave the campus. And there was a one credit requirement for the Minnesota Daily, so they would take a course like bowling just to be students, to technically be enrolled at the university to play. So, but it was wonderful to have these older, you know, 30, 35-year-old folk to kind of find out, you know, just what, you know, kind of their perspective on things. So it was a great place. It was a great place to write. And the Twin Cities was a great culture town and a great movie town, great theater town. So I got very lucky.
So you've been watching movies your whole life. Do you have a couple like favorite movies from your childhood? I do.
In childhood, there was a great year in 1968 when I was 7 years old. I remember seeing The Love Bug, the first one. And the same summer, I saw Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it was like two different planets. I mean, I loved them both, but I was really knocked for a loop by 2001, and which is a very challenging picture, and I hadn't seen that for years. I just saw it again recently, and I was sort of amazed at how I just sort of wondered how I would have received that as a 7 or 8 year old, because it's a real mind bender. But that summer was a biggie for me, and I thought, just to even kind of get my head around both those pictures coming out in the same time period for me, made me think, my God, this medium is amazing. You can do almost anything with it.
Uh-huh. So, so you basically got inspired because you loved writing and you loved movies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you feel so do you feel that people who love writing and love movies should definitely try and get into this field?
Well, they could if they. The best thing now, of course, is you can completely self-publish, right? You can establish your own blog. You can find ways to find out for yourself if this is something you really want to pursue seriously. Mm-hmm. It was a little. I wouldn't say it was tougher when I was coming up, because when I was coming up, there was a great deal more opportunity in the world of print media. I mean, really, when I was a student in college, there were 4 daily newspapers for a while, and 2 weekly newspapers, and 3 monthlies, and there was just a lot more possibility for writing about, in my case, film or theater. I wrote a lot about theater too along the last 20, 30 years. So, and that's really the only 2 things I've ever written about to any degree professionally is film and theater. So other folks, plenty of other critics have completely different backgrounds. They might have come up as English majors or all kinds of things, but I did sort of specialize early, and so far it's worked out.
So have you ever actually thought about writing a book?
No, I don't feel like I have a book in me. I don't. I certainly don't have a fiction book in me, because I feel like I can barely write a plot summary, let alone a plot. So I never had that impulse really. So no, not for me.
So you wouldn't even want to write a movie?
No. Although sometimes you see a movie like "Did You Hear About the Morgans," which was about the worst. I mean, I'll never get that time back, and it really makes you think. Anybody could write a better romantic comedy than that, but they're hard to write. There's so much that can go wrong with a movie before they get to the set, and this is why I think actors and acting is usually the last thing that's wrong with a picture. Because everything else has a chance to go wrong first, before they get to the set.
Well, that actually just reminds me, there was this movie based after one of my favorite books. It was called The Relic. It came out several years ago, and they cut out, first off, 2 of my favorite characters, and including the main one. And then they put in the beast that's supposed to be killing people, based after, apparently the guy who did Jurassic Park did it, but apparently they didn't pay him enough because it looked like this weird bug sort of thing with hair. And so, I mean, I understand what you're saying.
So, adaptations are tricky,
Yeah.
I mean, you're always going to, when you get a high-profile picture like the Twilight series, say, New Moon, people are very nervous about, okay, now how much did they change? Are they really monkeying with the plot? Harry Potter would be another case where people are bringing so much kind of love of the series, right, to whatever they see on screen. On the other hand, I think people have to remember that adaptation necessarily means leaving most of it out, and then hopefully getting a whole new perspective on it. Because what I want to see, what I want to feel when I go to a film is, I want to get a sense of what that director really thought about that material. Like, why did you want to make this? Why is it interesting to you? And we were just working on a best of the decade project on the show at the movies with my co-host Tony Scott, and we were both kind of going through those horrible torture of figuring out which 10 out of 5,000 to pick in a ridiculous project in a way. But turns out my number 1 is There Will Be Blood, and that's a film that I always liked, but not until I re-saw it recently did I think this is something, and this is a case where the director, Paul Thomas Anderson, adapted an Upton Sinclair novel from 1927, Oil, used about 1/10 of it, just the first 100 pages, and then threw all the rest of it out, all of it, and just wrote his whole new thing. And this is why I think that film feels like something completely unruly and interesting and alive. Yeah.
Well, I've seen that a lot because I feel like you should sometimes do that. Like I saw several film versions of The Phantom of the Opera, and then I read the book and I was like, he lets them go just randomly? That doesn't make any sense.
In the book, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the Gaston Leroux original. Yeah. I had to put up with that thing when I was reviewing theater over and over because that damn Andrew Lloyd Webber musical kept coming around again. And I think that's a great show if you don't have to listen to it. I just hate the music. So.
Yeah.
But it's funny how a story like that can just keep coming back every 10, 20 years over and over, and the audience just has a great appetite for it.
Well, I think that's what happens with great works of literature, even if the ending is horrible, like The Three Musketeers.
Yeah, or even, I don't think anyone would even claim that Leroux's original Potboiler, The Phantom of the Opera, is great literature, but it's a great yarn, a great story.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, I mentioned Jaws earlier. That book is barely functional as a book.
Yeah.
And then Spielberg, again, interestingly, the adaptation of Jaws for the screen throws out an entire subplot about an affair between the sheriff's wife and the Richard Dreyfuss character. Anyway, threw it all out. and the movie is terrific. You know, it's still one of my favorite pictures.
They also didn't kill off one of the main characters too.
In
Jaws, because
Right.
at the end of the book, the ship is sinking, and there's only one main character. I forget his name. Left alive.
Right, the sheriff in the original.
Yeah, the other two characters get killed.
Right, so they decided to keep two and kill one.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So there it is. You know, yeah. I mean, why? I mean, that might be more of an audience-minded decision. Like, well, I don't want to kill everybody off, but I like almost everything about Jaws. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, when I read the book, I thought, geez, it barely works. But you know, there it is. It works great on screen.
Well, that's Spielberg for you.
Yep.
Right now we're gonna, I have a couple posters of recent movies that are coming out here.
Let's see what we got.
I'm just gonna ask you what you think of each one, and then you tell us a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Good. It's a speed round, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Speed round. Okay, good.
Okay, Paranormal Activity is a movie about ghosts that has gotten mixed reviews. Some people say it's the scariest movie they've ever seen. Others say this movie is horrible. Why did they put it in theaters?
Well, as usual, the truth is in the middle somewhere. So I actually enjoyed this film. I saw it at midnight with a good crowd. I think that film, I sort of love the story behind the film. It cost, whatever, like $10,000 to make.
Yeah.
He made it several years ago, just in a suburb of San Diego, the writer-director. And like the Blair Witch Project a few years ago, it just sort of has that homemade, found quality that feels like the truth, and so it's in a way a little scary. I think the key to that film is that it has two really good jolts right when you need them, right when you might get really itchy, and I think a lot of the audience is starting to think, okay, is this thing going to pay off or not? And then bam, bam, you get two good scares at the end. I like the film.
Okay. How does it compare to like Cloverfield, which is a very similar sort of
similar style? Yeah, good point. Although there's a lot more fixed camera in Paranormal Activity, and the whole vibe and the whole approach visually of Cloverfield is that shaky cam, you know, running with the whole movie camera thing. I like Cloverfield too. I think it's pretty canny how they keep the monster hidden most of the way.
Yeah.
I think that movie's actually got kind of a nervy ending because it's downbeat. It's not a movie I would revisit necessarily because of the filmmaking. Might be true of Paranormal Activity too. I'm not sure the filmmaking would be interesting enough for me to see it a second time, but it worked a first time for me. So yeah, I liked it.
Okay, this film I wasn't actually even going to include because I knew it was going to be really bad. But I read your review and it was so funny because you were so mean about it.
Well, you know, I don't take any pleasure. I mean, it's just the worst thing on the planet right now. It's one of the worst. It's really depressing to see. Again, talented actors. I think actors are the last thing going wrong with the movie, and this script is bankrupt. I think it's sort of mean-spirited. And I just felt like I needed like a vacation after seeing it. It's awful. So
yeah.
What can I say? I can say nothing good about this film.
I just thought it was so funny because I was reading your review and about halfway through you say, I would rather watch Robin Williams and John Travolta sitting in a log for 2.5 hours than this movie. Right. And I was like,
right. Well, and they look like they would rather do that. That's the thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of visible discomfort, I think, in what's going on in these actors' faces in the movie because they don't feel secure about the material, and they're kind of overacting as a result because they think, it's not working. I have to really punch up the energy, and the whole film feels like that. It's a real strain. Next.
Okay. The action thriller that's going to destroy the world.
It will. It did. It did. 2012.
Yeah.
You know, I can't even really defend my affection for this movie. It's a total cheeseball. It's not even really a good movie by most standards because it doesn't. It's so kind of willy-nilly about the plotting, and but I have a huge residual affection for the disaster movie genre because I grew up with it when I was in middle school myself and early teenage. I mean, this was the time of Earthquake, The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure. Again, none of them particularly good movies, and in a way, many of those films are terrible movies, but they're enjoyable, terrible movies. And that's the distinction. I wouldn't say this is a terrible movie because I actually think I love how it's just absolutely insane in terms of plotting, and it almost doesn't care about the plot or how it moves the characters around. It is just simply one damn calamity after another. And I think any movie where you have a guy outrunning an earthquake in a limo is okay with me. That's what I say about that. So it's not a good film, but I enjoyed it enough to actually recommend it, and then hear angry callers later. So.
And now we have the everyone's favorite teenage vampires.
Yeah. You know, we reviewed this on at the movies, and Tony Scott said it much better than I did. He said it's not a movie. It's not just a movie for teenage girls. It's actually a movie that turns you into a teenage girl. and yeah, we both, and this beat every. We both sort of like this film. I've actually kind of liked both of the Twilight pictures. I guess just because they don't feel like monster blockbusters trying to eat you alive. They actually feel kind of about the right size for the story.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I kind of went with both of them. Again, would I see them a second time? Probably not. But
yeah.
And I would also say, for anybody who really wants to see Kristen Stewart completely doing really acting well in a good film, see Adventureland, which is one of my favorite comedies of the year. Didn't get much of an audience, but it's an excellent film.
Okay. Okay. The Road.
The Road, toughie. That was a tough one to write about because I was right in the middle on that, and those are the most difficult reviews to write, the mixed review. It's much easier to respond to something you really love or you really hate. It's easier to write, and it's easier, frankly, to read, I think, as a reader. But I would put it to you, Tom, that half of what we see in a given year is somewhere in between inspiration and disaster. It's sort of, I mean, how often do you go to movies and you think, well, it was okay? You know, a lot. You know, that response is pretty common, and I'd say half the year is like that. Anyway, this was, you know, it's based on a Cormac McCarthy novel, very stark, interesting end-of-the-world novel, when it's basically a father-son story as they make their way down to the coast where they have heard there may be some hope for the future down there, right? I mean, I did struggle to engage with this, and I'm still, frankly, not sure why. I think it's very well acted by especially Viggo Mortensen, and he's the best, most successful element of the film. But it doesn't feel to me like a piece of cinema that exists apart from the book. It felt a little dutiful and a little by the numbers. But again, not bad. So it was a very hard review to write.
Yeah,
right in the middle. So, yeah.
Okay, Brothers, the only movie where you're going to see Tobey Maguire attempting to beat somebody.
You know, and I like this film a lot more than most people. And it's based on a Danish picture. I like Jim Sheridan is the director here, the Irish director who made a great film, My Left Foot, for which Daniel Day-Lewis won his first Oscar. But this film, I think, is much better than most of the reviews have given it credit for. It's a very intense story about a soldier, Tobey Maguire, who's about to go off to his third tour of duty in, I believe, Afghanistan, and then his wife, played by Natalie Portman, has a friendship and maybe something more on the horizon with the brother, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. And then as the soldier returns from a horrific experience on his third tour, that's the premise. I liked it. It's a very tightly packed melodrama. It's not a classic, and it doesn't have the kind of easy breathing or the detail that I think a great movie about war or the home front should have. But I found it very compelling, and I do think Maguire is probably giving the best performance he's ever given.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was dismissed by a lot of people. I like that film.
Okay. The next one I don't think is out in theaters yet, or maybe will be
today.
Oh, today?
Today, right now. In fact, I'm going to go right now. No, I've already seen it.
I understand it took 10 years to make it. Or?
Long time. I mean, it takes a long time to make most movies, but James Cameron, the writer-director, who's got a great resume of all kinds of really kind of influential fantasies from the first two Terminator pictures to the second Aliens, he made that, and of course he's still got the highest grossing film of all time, Titanic, which made $1.8 billion. Now this, he's also made 3 times in his career, he's made the most expensive movie to date. Terminator 2 at that time was the most expensive movie ever made. Titanic, which had unbelievable cost overruns and like months and months and months of shooting, and that really felt like a flop in the making. Turned out to be, in my view, the most enjoyable, badly written film I've ever happily paid to see twice.
Yeah.
Because I think visually it's really something. You could say the same for Avatar. I think the first 90 minutes in particular is really, really transporting. And I had more and more trouble with the second half, and it's longish, but a lot of people don't have any trouble with any of it. They just adore the experience of seeing it in 3D especially. And the theory we're kind of kicking around lately with some of my colleagues in Chicago is that the people who seem to be most kind of taken away by it are maybe middle-aged critics, female and male, who have never hacked around playing Halo 2. Or they've never really spent hours sort of in an immersive video game thing where they're trying to get to the next level. And this film has some of that same feeling, and it might be kind of a first-time experience for them. I'm not a video game guy myself, but maybe that's why I really did. Yeah, I did sort of fell into this, especially for the first 90 minutes. I have a lot of problems with the second half, but again, the first half is pretty magical. So.
Okay.
All right.
So you said you really enjoyed There Will Be Blood. That was one of your favorite movies. Do you have any other ones?
Well, I got a lot of films that have always meant a lot to me. You know, one of my favorite comedies is His Girl Friday with Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. It's based on a great Chicago newspaper play, The Front Page. You know, love that film. Love the early Marx Brothers. Love a lot of Orson Welles' work, Citizen Kane. The first half of Magnificent Ambersons, and the studio took that film away from him and it sort of reshot it with different people. That's a depressing case too, where you have like artistry and then followed by sort of confusion because the studio imposed their own ending on it. Man, you know, there's a great silent film by Carl Dreyer called The Passion of Joan of Arc, which most people are not familiar with, but that's a film that if you really want to see poetry in silent film, that's the one, Passion of Joan of Arc. So that's some of them. Okay. That list changes all the time, though. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you, Tom.
We're out of time. Tune in next time for the A-List.